Ubiquiti has made sure that the wireless meshing is enabled by default so that in case of multiple units, the uplink happens quickly, which is fine, but some users have complained that it may have an impact on the wireless performance. And since I kind of forgotten about this feature because I assumed that I need to enable features when needed and not go through a list of functions that have to be disabled, there is a chance that I could have gotten a better performance from the Ubiquiti U7 Pro Max. Maybe, it's not really a given. Which is why I admit I wasn't very keen on retesting this access point because it takes multiple weeks to test one device, but I had to do it anyway. So if you were wondering why it takes so long between videos, know that I actually move as fast as humanly possible. Anyway, as the title says, I did go ahead and retested the Wi-Fi 7 access point to see if the wireless meshing cuts into the bandwidth or into the throughput, and these are the results. I started with the single client tests and I used only the Wi-Fi 7 and the Wi-Fi 6 client devices. There shouldn't be that much of a difference for the Wi-Fi 5 clients anyway. Now let's see. There is definitely a better throughput without the meshing being enabled at 5 feet, but only with the Wi-Fi 7 client. Bear in mind that I tried my very best to maintain the same signal attenuation as the first time I tested the U7 Pro Max. The Wi-Fi 6 client performed more or less the same, at least up until I reached the 70-foot point. Using the 80 MHz channel bandwidth, I got pretty much the same performance as the first time I tested this access point. But that's not really the case when using the 160 MHz and the 320 MHz channel bandwidth. I got a far better throughput, more than double than the first time, which is definitely notable. But all this happened upstream. What about downstream? Again, there are some differences up until the 45-foot mark, but it's not as meaningful as I expected. Reaching the 70-foot point and even at 45 feet, I did see some serious improvement, but once again only when using the 160 and the 320 MHz channel bandwidth, obviously with the 6 GHz and the 5 GHz radio bands. This is a bit unexpected since I admit I was fairly sure that it won't be that much of an impact, but indeed there is a difference as long as the meshing is enabled and not as an improvement. Well, at least that's what the single client tests show, so let's also run some multi-client latency tests as well. I didn't run the full set of tests since it would have taken me an extra 2 days, but enough to get an idea on whether we will see a better latency or not. Let's start with the 1080p streaming on 5 clients. We get to see the same 3 client devices staying beneath 100 milliseconds and maintaining a similar latency as the first time I tested this access point. But I suppose the Wi-Fi 5 clients did a bit better here. Then again, I wouldn't call anything below 50 milliseconds a win, but at least we get under 100 milliseconds for at least 75% of the time. Next, I simulated 4K streaming on 5 client devices with a throughput cap of 35 megabits per second per client. And we again see similar latency values across 3 client devices which manage to stay below and near 100 milliseconds for about 90% of the time. One Wi-Fi client did perform better once again, although 150 milliseconds and above does not really constitute a good latency for most things, let alone 4K streaming. On the next step, I simulated a more intense type of traffic by downloading continuously a 10 MB file on 2 client devices, while 2 others handled frantic web browsing and one the 4K streaming traffic. The browsing and the 4K streaming clients performed the same as the first time more or less, but the downloading clients displayed a slightly different latency. The Wi-Fi 6E client did better by about 100 milliseconds up until that last 1%, while the Wi-Fi 6 client actually performed worse, so in a sense, they cancelled each other out. As for the throughput, the first time I tested the U7 Pro Max, I measured about 510.3 megabits per second, just for the downloading clients. The second time I measured a bit less, 419.4 megabits per second. The last multi-client test removes the 4K streaming client and replaces it with voice over IP, while the Wi-Fi 6E client will now download a 1 MB file continuously. I could see some minor differences, but honestly the performance is very similar across the 2 graphics on all 3 client devices. So does disabling the wireless meshing have a positive impact on the overall performance of the Ubiquiti U7 Pro Max? In terms of throughput, I did see some improvement on the single client test, especially when I was farther away from the access point. but that's mainly using the 160 MHz with the 5 GHz radio band and the 320 MHz channel bandwidth. Using the 80 MHz width, the throughput didn't budge that much. As for latency, I did see some clients doing slightly better, but overall it's not a significant improvement. So there you have it. Make sure to disable the wireless meshing if you're not going to use it, since it's an opt-out feature instead of opt-in. Ubiquiti should have known better. In any case, that's all for now. Thank you for watching and see you next time.